The budget crisis is hitting everybody hard. The cities and towns are being forced to cut expenses and raise taxes. First selectmen and women in small and rural towns across the state are complaining they are being hit especially hard. With us today is Bart Russell with the Connecticut Council of Small Towns. Bart, nice to see you back here again.
Good to see you, Dennis.
First of all, talk to us about exactly what these towns are going through these days.
Well, it's not just towns. We obviously share the same concerns that mayors of cities have. We knew coming into this legislative session, this biennial budget, that we were facing an economic tsunami that was going to create real problems for budget makers, policy makers, the governor, legislative leaders, and it has, in fact, done that. We have a budget impasse that is creating great uncertainty for suburban and non-metro towns and big cities.
And worst case scenario, what are some of these towns going to have to go through?
Well, there are people who think that we won't have a budget certainly by next Wednesday, which is the date of adjournment for the legislative session. Others have talked about the summer and the fall. And if we go that deep into the year without a budget, the possible implications could be that we will have budget cuts made late in a town's fiscal year, which would result in either layoffs, furloughs, and or supplemental tax bills that I think everybody would be hurt by.
A lot of people who move in here from other states say, why are all these small towns have their own little governments and their own police departments and their own services? And the governor, of course, has suggested regionalism to some places. Your organization has found something's wrong with regionalism, correct?
Well, it isn't regionalism per se. We have numerous regional compacts among the 120 towns we represent, voluntarily entered into where shared services make sense. Our beef with the governor and the legislature is when they advocate and promote a top-down approach, sort of a one-size-fits-all cookie cutter that is mandated upon the towns. We think that's wrong, and we think that there's no evidence to show that it saves towns money. And in fact, an article by the editor of the Connecticut Economy last summer demonstrated that it actually could cost you money to mandate regional services.
But the argument could be, too, that you could save money on some services. For instance, if 3 towns with low crime rates had 1 police department, things like that.
Yeah, and I think that where towns and where their citizens, let's not forget, we're talking about taxpayers and citizens, want that, and they choose to do that, they'll enter into those kinds of agreements. And as I say, they range from everything as mundane as dog pounds and assessor services to shared plows. There's no opposition to the idea of getting together with other towns on a voluntary basis. It is when folks, primarily folks with what I call a myopic metro view, an urban view, who don't understand small towns, that are run, we think, efficiently and affordably, sort of force these ideas on us.
But now some of these towns, of course, have smaller tax bases, obviously, than some of the bigger cities. What can they do to change that at all?
Well, not much. I mean, we have a dichotomy. We have a problem where we want to keep some of the bucolic, attractive small towns quaint, maintain their rural
maul them down for strip malls, obviously, you know.
And yet they have increasing expenses that can't be controlled for schools, public services. We leave them with very few choices other than to look at growing their commercial grand list, which often means strip centers. But in this economic environment, those aren't even options anymore.
If you could give your wish list to the legislature and the governor, what would it be?
It would start with 3 words: do no harm. We applaud the governor and both the Democratic and Republican caucuses for producing a budget that essentially holds education funding at the same level as it was last year. That's the biggest budget buster that towns face. And we hope that we're able to get through the session with a continued commitment to full funding of education cost sharing, the grants that pay for K through 12 education in these communities.
When you hear talk about tax increases, how do you react?
Well, it depends. At the local level, property taxes, it's no surprise Connecticut is among the top states in the nation in terms of its over-reliance on local property taxes. We have no other place to turn, and so we look to the state to fill the gap. We don't love the idea that mayors, first selectmen, town managers have to go to the Capitol hat in hand begging for aid to fill that gap, but that's what the system is that we live in.
Bart Russell from the Connecticut Council of Small Towns, thank you so much for being with us. Best of luck as this budget impasse continues.